Call the meeting to order at 4:01 p.m. We have everybody from the committee here today, and we have Kendra Jo Grindle from Maine Connectivity Authority. Review and approval of the prior meeting minutes from October 30th, 2024.
Make a motion to approve.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve the October 30th, 2024 meeting minutes is written. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
All right. Update of action steps from prior meeting. It's been a while. So Mike, you attended the Gouldsboro Select Board meeting back in December, I think it was.
It was either late November or early December.
Mm-hmm.
It's all in the distant past now.
It is. I think mine was a little bit, I think mine was around November 9th or so.
Yeah.
And likewise, that's buried back in my memory, but I just wanted to I guess I would say the select board that at least that was in place at the time was receptive to the idea of where we understood BEAD and the broadband project to be at the time, especially considering it would mean no required contribution from the community. They're really, I mean, I had given, the rough overview that we had discussed previously, and there weren't really much in the way of questions except what will this cost the community? And
Similar reaction in Goldsboro, and
okay.
The only question was when we did a year ago or so put things out for bid, who had responded and who had responded substantively. But
Yes.
That was just a curiosity question. Everybody was happy with waiting to see what was developing.
Yeah. Sandy, I know I think you were at the meeting when I gave that presentation. Does that correlate with your recollection of that meeting?
Yep, that is correct.
Okay.
Similar folks were just curious about what was coming down the road.
Tom was my wingman at the Goldsboro meeting. Did I accurately report?
That's my recollection.
All right. Well, we're all remembering correctly together, so that's good. All right. I haven't heard anything from any of the select boards recently. So I don't think there's much else to do on that. I did get a question from the Gouldsboro town manager, however, back at the beginning of March, I think it was, because Spectrum had asked for a letter of support, and he was wondering about that. And I had at the time given him the context of basically the two respondents throughout this process and how accurate and collaborative they had been to date. So, and that was, I said, if you want to do a letter, by all means, go ahead. But here's the perspective that I have from the committee. So, and he said, that's all I needed to know. All right.
And
well,
Rob, I just wanted to update you to Winter Harbor Fidium representative had come and also just updated the town on what they've been doing through the community, because we had so many questions from community members wondering why Fidium was coming through town. They thought that maybe they got some sort of grant or whatnot. And the update was just basically that they were putting in the fiber throughout the community, but they hadn't gone live with anything. Their registration site was live, that people could go and register. And then once they would go live, they would just start taking whoever had interest. Haven't heard any further updates, but they're definitely, their vehicles are all over the community. They look like they're adding those junction boxes across the cables now.
And following up from that, I spoke to Kathy in advance of the meeting, I think it was. And I did introduce Simon Thorne to the Gouldsboro town manager in case Gouldsboro wanted a similar meeting. I don't know if that actually transpired, but at least the connection was made there, so.
And Kendra, Joe, you may not know, but Kathy Carruthers has retired, so we don't have a town manager in Winter Harbor right now. Sarah Liscombe is acting in the interim, and they are recruiting for someone to fill the position.
Unless we have anything else specific to Gouldsboro or Winter Harbor to report, we can jump on ahead to information gathering and get an update on Bede, which my impression is, Kendra Joe, that we're a little bit behind the timetable that was anticipated, because it sounds like there was still some application work being done after what we thought was going to be the deadline. But I'll let you speak to all that.
Sure. Thanks everyone. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Kendra Jo Grindle. I'm the Director of Community Strategy at the Maine Connectivity Authority. So I will share as much as I can, partly because this is still an active process, in which we have not granted awards nor taken much information to our board, for public consumption, but also because we are in a fairly changing landscape with our federal funding. So we did run our subgrantee selection process, and it was extended till March 7th. We were able to provide just a week or 2 weeks extension to that subgrantee selection process to allow for the qualified applicants to have some of the conversations that they needed to have, but also do some of their due diligence on priority listing. We have several applicants who are doing this in multiple states, and so there were just enough differences in our process that we wanted to make sure that they could adapt their submissions to fit what we were looking for. So that ran for a couple months, January 17th through the 7th. And we did have out of our 14 qualified applicants, we had 10 that submitted, or pre-qualified applicants, we had 10 that submitted applications into the subgrantee selection process. So the ones that didn't, we've had conversations with, they are either holding out for some of the alternative technology or non-deployment infrastructure awards, or they just no longer saw an interest in the project service areas or felt that they weren't as competitive as they could have been. So we had 53 applications from those 10. So some providers submitted one application for all their project service areas. Some submitted based on kind of regional projects. We did have within those project service areas, because we are scoring on individual project service level basis, and the competitive nature comes down to the individual project service area. We did ask them to flag, project service areas or PSAs that were kind of integral to their project. So as we work through scoring and as we look through negotiations, there might be a project service area in a group of 10 that they submitted for that they don't win or they're not coming in as highly competitive, and we seek to pull it out. They had to flag for us if that would work with their project, would still work with or without that project service area, or kind of without it, we can't move forward on the rest. We are currently working through remediation and heading into negotiation with these providers. So through remediation, we're reviewing everything that's come into us, making sure that all the numbers match, that I reviewed all of the letter of support that came in and scored just kind of initial scoring on those letters of support and the community engagement that they were supposed to demonstrate. We had them showcase their local coordination, local and tribal coordination, through a spreadsheet where they had to list all of their engagement with the community. It needed to be two-way engagement. It could take place by email or Zoom or in person, but they had to demonstrate to us that it took place, whether that's the email thread or minutes from the meeting or recording of the meeting. We wanted to make sure that this wasn't just, we sent an email to 100 communities, check the box. They had to have engagement back and forth. That and the letter of support is what got their full local and tribal coordination scoring in our priority scoring matrix. So all of that is pretty much done and fairly getting wrapped up. I think there's still some review on the financial side of things with our financial advisor. And then we're moving into negotiation. So negotiation is going to take a number of weeks, but we're going to work through with each provider their bids, making sure that they're coming in under our extremely high cost per location threshold. Also making sure that we're getting as much as we can for the project service areas. There's one of the reasons why we're not sharing a lot of information right now while we're in active process is because that's a little bit of our leverage. They don't know how many bids there are in a project service area when we're going into these negotiations, or if they're competing against another fiber provider or a cable provider or a alt tech. So we want to make sure that we can leverage as much as possible from the position that we're in. In addition to that, we are being told from the federal agency that deploys the BEAD program is NTIA, the National Telecommunications Information Administration. For those of you who are paying attention, we currently have an acting head for NTIA, and Adam Cassidy. He is making some decisions and moving things forward, but there's only so much that he is doing in an acting role. Ariel Roth has started to move through her confirmation hearing, and will go to Senate for approval, I would assume in the next week or two. However, she also just had another child, so I don't know how much she will be back to work once that confirmation hearing. So there's a little bit of up in the air. And a recognition that without solid leadership within the agency, we won't have a lot of answers on some of the questions that we have. Our funding has not paused. We are actively working through BEAD and working through kind of our planning dollars, which we do have access to. The way that the BEAD program was set up to work is it's for work already encumbered, so it's a reimbursement basis. We do not have our infrastructure funding to award. We have to work through the subgrantee selection process, work through awards, submit a final proposal to NTIA for their review and approval. And only after that final proposal is approved will we be able to draw down any of our infrastructure funding to get to award to our qualified applicants. So a little bit of a long process there, but it is one that's we're moving forward on. We've been told by our federal program officer, Brooke Barron, who remains in her position and lives here in Maine to keep moving ahead. We have kind of seen at a national level a few states ask for extensions to meet their final proposal timeline or to extend their final proposal timeline. The timeline for the final proposal, if we miss that milestone, we risk all of our funding that is put in law. So that is why some of the states that we've seen so far, I think about 10 of them have requested an extension, which does seem that they are getting approved, because if they don't want to risk their funding by delaying or pausing without federal approval. The last thing I will note is we're also paying a lot of attention to states that already had their final proposal submitted and approved under the former administration. It's unclear to us if they will have to go back, reopen their final proposal and resubmit or make any changes. So we're really kind of watching. This is a place where we're glad we're not first. Definitely not last either, but we're glad we're not first because we are paying close attention to some of the states that came before us, like Louisiana, Virginia, states that are in similar places to where we are. So that's most of my update. I can tell you that there were bids on the project service in your area. I cannot tell you who those bids were or for how much. But that we're working through them. And I know that you had on your agenda Simon Thorne joining, and I know that a lot of communities kind of have a feeling of who might have bid based on the outreach that they had done prior to submission. So now we just talked at you for about 10 minutes. I'm happy to answer any questions as much as I can.
Anyone? Sandy, go ahead.
So Kendra, if the scenario is, say, Fidium receives a bid on this and they come to our region and provide services, does this BEAD funding ensure that there will be accessibility for all? Or affordable services for all?
If they come through the BEAD program?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So we still have affordability in our scoring. And we're scoring against it, and that's based on federal benchmarks by the FCC. I will say that regardless of federal funding, we've seen a lot of fluctuation in the private sector and their subscription rates to accommodate large scale competition. What we have seen ahead of BEAD deployment is providers, particularly fiber providers, trying to be first to market in areas and wanting to kind of go around BEAD if they can, or make themselves more competitive under BEAD. And so what that has caused, even in some areas having multiple fiber providers or fiber and a cable provider, is a fluctuation that's resulting in more affordable pricing. We've also had some influx of, say, larger, so not necessarily all the way into your region, although potentially. So one of them, like Direct Communications, for instance, purchased Unitel in the last 5 years, probably like 3 or 4 years ago. They are based out of Idaho. They also have networks in Louisiana, and then they've bought Unitel. They've recently are in the process of acquiring Union River Telephone Company, which is around the Ellsworth area and a little north and inland. I would say the introduction of a provider like that, as well as some of our pre-qualified applicants from Canada having more interest in Maine, has also started to shift. So it's just market balance, right? And competition. So I'd say from an internal perspective, we're hopeful that regardless of the way that affordability is discussed or managed, or if we have to change the language around it, that the intent remains. Partially because that's where we already are with other federal funds that are out the door. We can't change the language around, but also because of those market demands. For our larger providers, probably not our main based as much, we consistently hear we're not going to have a pricing scheme for each grant funding. It's like statewide, regional maybe, but really statewide pricing. So it's not that BEAD applicants or BEAD locations will have a different cost per month than a private build, or than what we saw under capital projects funding that had a very strict affordability threshold and timeline. The thing that does not account for, which I've talked with a lot of communities about and we've been working through, it doesn't account for promotions. So you will probably still see fluctuation within your community around promotions. So they might do promotional pricing in an area to try to increase take rate, right? So you target a neighborhood or a region to try to drive adoption. You might also see that, you know, they'll run some opportunities community-wide or region-wide to try to increase the opportunity. So we don't in contract get into promotions. We try to set our contracts around non-promotional pricing. But what that does mean is that you might see fluctuation based on it. And usually it's I've kind of consistently seen it be kind of in the $10 to $20 range. Nothing more dramatic than that.
So just to follow up and dovetail on Sandy's question, would it be fair to say that any development that is done pursuant to a successful application and being awarded project under BEAD, those addresses that that project is designed to serve would necessarily have affordable access per the requirements of BEAD. But if they were building out, for example, we know that Consolidated is building out the fiber network throughout Gouldsboro and Winter Harbor in advance of any award. So areas that aren't BEAD covered areas will probably have access to the same service, but there's no guarantee because they're not being built to necessarily the restrictions of BEAD. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. So, yeah, I would say the biggest difference, the pricing may be the same or consistently the same. The difference is we would be in contract for those former locations, right? We would be in contract, we would have contractual regulation over those locations in the BEAD award. So we would be able to step in and have, whether it's a breach of contract or something like that, right? We have some levers to pull for private build, where we have no invested interest financially, then it's a lot harder. We do continue to have conversations regardless of whether a location is in or outside of our funding scope, because in a singular community, there's probably both locations and people talk and they share bills and you know, they're in select board meetings and they're on Facebook and talking to their neighbors. So we do typically raise concerns regardless. It just, we have a little bit more authority and the ability to put a provider or grant awardee in on notice of being in violation of our in good standing policy, which is written into the Connect Main Authority statute. So it's regulatory by law.
And you sort of touched on something that I wanted to get your opinion on, because it's what I've been telling people once we start getting questions about the you know, seeing Consolidated out there and putting fiber on poles. My conjecture was, given the timing, you know, knowing that the application process hadn't concluded, that it was probably work that Consolidated was doing on their own in anticipation of this process. Simon did confirm that part of one of the driving factors was they had RDOF obligations to do, and so that
Yes.
was a piece of it. Also, that the level of interest in the community also demonstrated that they should move forward with it. But my feeling was they were trying to get ahead of things and make their bid for BEAD more competitive by having more work already done. So therefore asking for, you know, less in the way of funds. Would that seem like, obviously it's conjecture, but is it conjecture that you tend to agree with?
Yeah, absolutely. You are not the first, I would say not even in the top 10 communities that have kind of raised a flag of, wait a second, we see a provider's truck, in this case, Fidium, rolling. Is this, did we miss something? Is this a grant opportunity? Is this BEAD? Yeah, not a MCA funded build or expansion, which does mean that they have their own plan and pathway. I haven't looked at an RDOF map in quite a while, but it doesn't, given the timeline of things, they do have RDOF, which is funding through the FCC and through a reverse public auction that happened a few years ago. They do have quota that they have to reach on a given timeline. And so trying to move those projects forward and pick up, I think this is one of those things of also, if you have crews out, you're going to pick up areas and locations where there is demand. So I hear Simon say this a lot to communities, even if they're not there yet, folks registering online and showing that they have an interest helps them prove internally that there is enough interest there to build out. So we also see this with MCA funded projects where we might not have a location listed on the federal map that we have to use and that backs up our federal funding. But if a provider is out building and they pass a location that's not on that isn't a dot on a map, they're going to pick it up because it's a potential customer, right? And it costs more if they didn't pick them up and then they got sent back out once it becomes a dot on a map. I think it's helpful to kind of track where they are. We will not have some of that data until two things occur. Sorry, my son is home and has found me. We had to draw a line in the sand with the FCC map, right? I think we're on version 6 at this point, but we had to draw a line and say, okay, we can only use all the information we have from the FCC map and our own data collection up to a point, because that map continues to get updated. So we had to create some kind of stagnant basis to build our project service areas around. That being said, we know that there are active builds happening all through this timeline. So through negotiations, as well as through providers continuing to submit their data collection to the FCC, we will be able to verify if there are locations that already have fiber build. We don't want to invest. We don't want to continue to invest in locations if they're already built to, especially with another provider. But we do want to make sure that we are sticking with the priority of a fiber expansion. So that was the original intent. So where there's been fiber investment, we want to make sure that we are, or where there maybe hasn't been fiber investment, we want to make sure that we're not missing the opportunity to invest in improved service. So we're not necessarily looking at fixed wireless expansion, or we recognize that there have been a lot of advancements around satellite and some other alt technologies that could potentially cover these locations. We are still looking at, until we hear otherwise, BEAD funding and our other funding as fiber priority to reach that 100 over 100 build threshold that Maine has set.
I have a couple more just little questions, but anybody else on the committee? I don't want to dominate this.
Keep going.
One of them was, you just alluded to satellite, and I know one of the changes that I've heard at the federal level is, a bit of a moving target with, the guidelines for selecting providers and solutions. And I think there's some sense that this may be, a move to, for example, make Starlink be a potential option in this. And I know in the past you've said fiber is your priority solution. And so do you see any of those, do you see this becoming a little bit less platform agnostic coming down from the federal level?
So the tricky part about the priority in BEAD for fiber, right? So if you look at our volume 2 initial proposal, there's the way we were asked to do that proposal is that there are 2 scoring matrices. One is for priority applications, the other is for non-priority applications. The priority applications are the fiber to the premise applications. That was not in law that was something that NTIA put into the guidance and built out. And so that is one of the reasons why it would potentially be at risk of having it changed, because it's not written into the law that way. I'd say that we continue, right? We have satellite and alternative technologies within our pre-qualified application list. We do have some submissions from them. I'd say that they're not as encompassing as, you know, every PSA across the state. We already started with our Working Internet ASAP program, and our partner in that is Starlink. We kicked that off last year, in advance, knowing that there are locations that are eligible for BEAD that are so high cost and so far removed, that we wanted to make sure that we were at least getting them a short-term solution as we work towards a long-term solution. That said, I can't tell you what changes are going to happen. I can tell you that there is not enough fiber density in the state of Maine to provide satellite to every single BEAD location. So there still is a dependency on fiber for those networks to function. And we also have to look at cost for fixed wireless, as well as the infrastructure for satellite to perform to the point that we need it to perform under this program and under the law. We would still need fiber investments to make that happen. So we don't know what we don't know at the time, and so we have to move forward with everything that we have on the table. I think our hope is that we wouldn't have to go back and rerun any of our process to date, and that the shift would come in our evaluation. But I think everything, because we haven't gotten to a point of final proposal approval and funding, I think everything's a bit on the table in terms of guidance that was developed under the former administration.
Okay. And I imagine it's safe to say that since the application window is closed and providers needed to know what they were bidding on, that at least now the PSAs are finalized. Do you have any sense if it changed much from the draft form that we first looked at in our communities? Or if it's pretty much the same?
It's fairly similar. I think some of the changes. It's a good question. And I can double check and follow up. I can check with our data analyst. I don't think a lot of the changes occurred.
Because in our case, we had 3 PSAs across Scoodic Peninsula. One was on an island, which
Yeah.
would probably be hard to change. And then the other was the bulk of the peninsula, and the last one was Birch Harbor area, I think, as I recall. So. I think there was something else that came to mind, but it wasn't tremendously important, so I didn't write it down. Anyone have anything else? Burning questions?
Yeah, I'm just looking at the
that's-
map while you talk.
That's what it was. Do you have a date by which it is MCA's hope to have completed the evaluation and selection?
So
Tentative?
We are still working to have our draft final proposal, unless told otherwise, or have to proceed otherwise. We are still looking to have our draft final proposal, I believe, for our June board meeting, which I can just find here. And that would be, our board meetings would be the first time that something is live. And so like June 20th, 27th.
June 27th, you say?
Yeah, so I don't think this has to go to our last mile infrastructure committee because of the review process of the BEAD program in general. But our last mile infrastructure committee is June 20th, and then our full board meeting is the 27th.
All right.
And did you say that will be a live public viewing?
Yeah. That any approvals or awards, and I forget what we're, tentative awards, right? We can't fully award something or enter contract until NTIA approves our final proposal. But it would be a review towards selection.
What time are those meetings usually scheduled, Kendra?
The board meeting on the 27th is at 10. The um last mile committee is at 1.
Okay.
So June 20th at 1, June 27th at 10.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, I'm out of questions, so
I have just
go for it,
one-
Sandy.
One more question. Kendra, you touched briefly about Canadian services. Is this something that's going to be impacted by tariffs as well?
I don't have a proper answer to that. So one of our pre-qualified applicants is Intis Group. They are based out of Canada, and we are currently working through their remediations. So I think it's a kind of a new place for us. I do know that we actually just discussed this the other day with our MooseNet team to run new fiber and to get a permit to run new fiber across the Canadian-US border. You do need presidential approval. And so that's one of our due diligences of, what assets do they already have? It's part of our technical review to try to, and across all of our providers, right? Especially where we're looking at the scope of BEAD, where it's so great, and it's all at once, but also a lot of the project service areas, rightfully so, are in areas where there isn't already existing infrastructure, or a lot of providers don't have trucks, they don't have existing infrastructure to replace or build upon. So, one of our technical reviews is just capacity. Do you have the people infrastructure? Do you have the trucks and the facilities to get to? And so from that company's perspective, it's also, do you already have assets that are readily available to deploy? And whether they're working with a US based company or not. We do have one Canadian provider that already operates in the state of Maine. They're not one of our pre-qualified applicants, I don't believe, but Down East Broadband Utility has a secondary provider that came on in the last 6 months that is a Canadian-based provider out of Nova Scotia. So, there has and will continue to be some interest. There just hadn't been previous to this last year.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us. You're welcome to stick around, but you're also free to go have your own life. I'm gonna talk about a little bit more of if anybody else has anything to mention about the consolidated build and communicating and one little bill approval. So.
Yeah, there is one more thing I just wanted to flag. I know we usually talk at length about infrastructure, and that's top of mind for a lot of folks. I will just note that there are non-deployment funds as well, and we did feel that we got to a place where we would have non-deployment funds, and that can go across workforce, digital equity, and other areas. We do expect there to be a shift in what we can deploy those funds with. So basically, once we met the goals on the infrastructure side, any funding that was left in our allocation, there were a set number of areas we could plan to deploy. And in our volume 2, we kind of break out our priority of those areas. We definitely assume that there will be changes to non-deployment funding. There's also the potential that they could just claw back those fundings and kind of erase non-deployment. So I'm not going to speculate. It's just an area of opportunity that we're unsure about. We are also, from a digital equity standpoint, in a place with our state capacity funding where our federal agency has not told us directly that our contract has either been paused or canceled. We do know that that is the case for the competitive funding that was awarded to many of our regional partners, as well as the National Digital Equity Center. So they've been awarded, but has been completely on pause. So a lot of on the digital equity side of our work is definitely up in the air, and therein just flagging that a lot of our partners, so Hancock County Regional Planning, Island Institute, Sunrise County Economic Council, National Digital Equity Center, just to name a few in your area, are seeing the impact of that pause. I know for partners like the National Digital Equity Center, as well as the main library, have had to let go of staff, or at least pause, let go of their staff, but with the hope that they would be able to rehire if funding does pick back up. So that's probably the side of our work where there has been a lot more kind of yes or no activity on whether or not it's going to move forward. We do have hope on our digital equity capacity grant that even if it got to a point where our funding was in jeopardy, we might be able to reapply and still get to some of the work, but under different language and different focus. Just wanted to flag that because I know that it comes hand in hand in a lot of communities as you try to build out infrastructure and make sure that folks have the resources and skills to take advantage of it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that regardless of what it is, equity seems to be a dirty word in Washington. So, but this too shall pass.
Well, thank you all for having me. Feel free to reach out if anything comes up, and as we continue to move forward, or if there's any changes or updates to anything that I said, I'll make sure that I get that out to you all.
Thank you very
Thanks, Dana
much.
Jo.
Thank you, Kendra.
Yeah. Thank you all. Have a good night.
All right. I know before we got started here, we were just having a little chat, but anybody have any observations or communication they wanted to share about what we're seeing with the consolidated build recently with Fidium?
I don't know if Sandy was on when I mentioned that I currently have a fiber deadhead on my deadheaded at my driveway, but I can't make it work. The tech who put it there said it would be just a couple of weeks before somebody contacted me, so I waited a couple of weeks and nobody contacted me, so I went online and entered my address online, and it popped up, and I was able to see quotes for service fees. Call this number. So I called the number, and they couldn't find me in the system and said I wasn't eligible yet. So I would gather that we're close in terms of this build out, but it hasn't been lit up yet.
I think the trucks that we're seeing out there now are the ones that are doing the hardware to facilitate signing up customers and operating the network. So I agree. I'm optimistic that certainly by the end of this year, they should have this network pretty well live all across the peninsula.
I'm looking forward to that. I'm currently on Spectrum, and it in the last 12 months has become more erratic, and I rarely get the speeds that I'm paying for. So it's just, I don't have the sense that they're committed to serving this area, kind of
Yeah.
at the end of the line.
And Sandy, I know you're looking forward to something better than Spectrum too, so.
Yeah, same thing. And they just attach, are you talking about those big black boxes, Mike? Right? For the
I
attachment?
haven't seen the box. All I know is that the
Yeah.
cable was brought to my driveway. I'll
They
look for
just,
the boxes the next time the rain stops.
yeah, they're up and down all of Summer Harbor Road right now. And I haven't really paid attention to how many of them they've installed, but the past couple of weeks, there seem to be new boxes attached to the fiber line all over the place now. So it looks like they're getting closer to being ready. I haven't tried to register or anything yet.
Have you expressed interest on their website?
No, I have not.
That's probably a good idea, just so that
Yeah.
you're on the
Yeah,
mailing list.
well, it makes me wonder if we should encourage people to at least register just to make sure that the build happens. The concern I have is like they know where all the pinged addresses are. So are they putting those boxes up next to all the pinged addresses because they know that they want to have that infrastructure in place if they are on the BEAD funding? And will they still take care of those ones that are down the last mile?
I think what we're going to find is the case, and this is what Simon said one of the several times that he was joining us, is that regardless of what the BEAD project is, they're probably going to try and grab the entire area. So I think as long as there is fiber along that pole, they are planning to be able to sign up people along in front of whose driveway it runs, basically. So that's I think their goal, and certainly that makes the most sense. I mean, that's the way they're going to maximize their take.
Right.
I agree. We could definitely, not that we necessarily want to come across as advocating for one solution or another, but we could certainly include in a statement that we're sending out over email to encourage people to sort of pre-register to help increase the demand in this area. So I don't know that it'll necessarily increase or speed up the deployment, but more demand won't hurt anyone. That's for sure.
My question too was, you said Spectrum went to Goldsboro and asked for a letter of approval or whatnot. So is Spectrum still thinking that they're in the game?
I would assume they think that. We did hear that they were in some communities putting in fiber, even though they only expressed to us that they wanted to expand their existing copper coax network. So I saw there is a Spectrum sign on the corner of Taft Point Road now. I think it's Taft Point Road. It says Spectrum Internet is here. Well, I'm pretty sure Spectrum Internet was there before. But I haven't seen them putting up anything new. So I did get one question a while back from the form on the website. Somebody was asking, do they need to attach something to the house for us to get this internet? And I said, well, because they said, is there a way to not have something attached to the house? I said, yes, there is. It's to not get fiber.
Yeah. Yeah.
But most of the solutions that are being looked at right now are terrestrial and would require some sort of attachment to the house to get the service. So
I
part and
wonder
parcel.
what they were trying to think. Maybe they wanted to have wireless at the driveway and just pick it up like Wi-Fi.
I don't know. I didn't get a response back from it, so I don't know what their thought process was. I mean, maybe they wanted to hear that, satellite or Starlink was a solution that was being considered locally.
Yeah.
So, in which case, I still don't necessarily understand the logic because it's available now.
Yeah.
If you want it, you can already sign up for that. But they may be a person who just doesn't have a lot of background on what this would look like in the first place, too. Any other thoughts on what we're seeing on the roads?
Oh,
Alright.
Roy, are you suggesting that you're gonna, we are gonna put out some sort of a communication now to those that are on our email list?
Yeah, that's the next thing here. I did want to send out another update. And I think it'd be important to let people know in the community that if they are interested, they could sign up, and doing so would help cement the desire for this service, at least on the side of Consolidated with Fidium, but also to, not to specifically advocate for that, just to make it clear that it's something that they can do at this point.
We're not their
Yeah,
salespeople, but it's probably worth pointing out that expressing interest on the website does not obligate one to finally contract with Fidium.
Correct.
I agree, and I would also, if the recording is available for today's meeting too, just for folks to get the current update from Kendra Joe, that would be helpful to communicate as well.
Yep, I think we usually include a link to the YouTube channel, and I'll be sharing this video. Once I type up the minutes, then I'll post it and we'll go
Cool.
from there. And if you want, I can do the draft of the communication before I hit send for the community, just to get your feedback. I don't think there's going to be much other than to say BEAD is ongoing, but in the meantime, it appears that Consolidated is building out the towns. And oh, by the way, if you're interested, you can sign up here, link to our recent meeting. Does that
And
make sense?
I would still use the name Fidium. All the trucks
Yeah.
say Fidium on it.
Yeah, I'll be clear on.
Yeah.
But I think
And,
it's also important for people to understand Fidium as a product of Consolidated
Yeah,
Communications. too.
exactly. And is there any update? I may have missed this, but the town report, the broadband report for the town reports, is that in process?
We haven't done anything for Winter Harbor yet, but Gouldsboro was really trying to get ahead of the town report thing this year and requested an update to be submitted. I want to say it was last fall for this upcoming town report, which I was like,
Wow.
do you
Right,
realize
right
most
early.
of the year is still to go in the time between?
So much will change.
Yep, but that's what they
Yeah.
wanted, so that's what they got.
I did hear last year when it came to printing our town reports, so if the earlier they get it, I guess there's a reduced rate if they
Oh.
if they have more time to get the printing in. There was something about that. That may be some of the foundation for that, but
Well,
it is
Sarah still hasn't gotten me the images that they want to try and cobble a cover together out of, so I think one report is, I mean, I'll certainly ask her when she wants it, but
Yeah.
the only other thing, unless anybody else has any thoughts on the email blast. Let me see if. I think this is it. Yep. The domain for the website just renewed recently, so I would appreciate getting approval to get that reimbursed. We still have funds held by the town of Gouldsboro.
So
And,
moved.
Okay.
Second,
Was that
Good.
Mike with the motion?
Yeah.
Okay. And Tom with the
Tom,
second. All right.
second.
All right. Motion and a second to approve reimbursement for the 22.99 for the domain renewal. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Thank you very much. And then I'd say we're still in a similar place to where we were last fall. There's no clear timeline on us actually needing to do much else, but I'd say we give it another month and see if there are any updates, and we can decide when we feel it's necessary to have another meeting.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Sounds great.
Right.
Thank you.
All right. Well, in that case, thank you all for joining in today, and we'll call it adjourned at 4:56.
Thank
Okay.
you all.
Take
Good night,
care.
everybody.
Have a good
Take
day.
care. Bye.